In the summer of 1925, two men who had never met were about to build the same theory from opposite ends of physics. One was 23 years old, half-blind from hay fever, stranded on a barren island in the North Sea because it was the only place in Germany with no pollen. The other was in his late 30s, on a holiday in the Swiss Alps with a woman who was not his wife, whose identity has never been conclusively established. They used completely different mathematics. They started from completely different assumptions. They had completely different pictures in their heads of what they were doing. And when the dust settled, every prediction their theories made was identical. Two keys, cut by different locksmiths in different countries, and they opened the same door. That should have been the triumphant ending. It was not. Because the theory they had built, the most successful, most precisely confirmed theory in the history of science, tells you what will happen, but refuses to tell you what is happening. And a century later, physicists still argue about what that means. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture a coin spinning in the air. Not heads, not tails, spinning. It is both in some sense. It is neither in another. And it is something in between that has no name in ordinary language, a blur of possibility that will become definite only when it hits your palm and you look. Now, here is the thing that quantum mechanics says, and I need you to actually take this seriously. It is not that the coin is heads or tails and you just do not know which yet. It is not hidden information. The coin, while spinning, genuinely is neither. It does not have a definite state. The definiteness does not exist until the moment of measurement. And that right there is the thing that haunts physics, not as a metaphor, as a mathematical fact. Let me show you how we got here. Werner Heisenberg in the summer of 1925 was miserable. He was a young physicist working as an assistant to Max Born in Göttingen, and his hay fever was so severe he could barely think. His face was swollen. His eyes were streaming. So he asked for leave and took a ferry to Helgoland, a tiny, treeless, rocky island in the North Sea where there was almost no vegetation and, crucially, almost no pollen. And there, alone on that windswept rock, he worked through the nights on a radical idea. Heisenberg's approach was to throw out everything you cannot directly observe. You cannot see an electron orbiting a nucleus. You cannot watch it trace a path. You have never seen an orbit, and you never will. What you can observe are the spectral lines, the specific frequencies and intensities of light that atoms emit and absorb. Those are measurable. Those are real. So Heisenberg decided to build a theory using only observable quantities. He constructed mathematical tables, arrays of numbers, describing the relationships between different energy states and the probabilities of transitions between them. No orbits, no trajectories, no pictures of little balls circling a nucleus, just the things you can measure, organized into a mathematical structure. And the math he ended up with was strange. When he multiplied two of his tables together, the result depended on the order of multiplication. A times B did not equal B times A. Now, in ordinary arithmetic, order does not matter. 3 times 5 is 5 times 3, always. But Heisenberg's quantities did not obey this rule, and he found this deeply unsettling. Let me give you a thought experiment so you can feel why this matters physically, not just mathematically. Imagine I want to know 2 things about you, your position and your momentum. In classical physics, I measure position first, then momentum, or momentum first, then position. Either way, I get the same answer. The order does not matter. But Heisenberg's math was saying something different. It was saying measure position first, and the act of measuring changes the momentum. Measure momentum first, and the act of measuring changes the position. The order matters because each measurement alters the thing you are about to measure next, not because your instruments are clumsy, because that is how the universe works at the scale. The 2 measurements do not commute. Doing them in different orders gives you different results, and the amount by which they fail to commute is Planck's constant, and that number again, always that number. Heisenberg stayed up all night checking his calculations, and at 3 in the morning, when he had confirmed the result and could not find any errors, he was too excited to sleep. He walked out to the northern tip of the island and climbed a rock that jutted into the sea, and he sat there watching the sun rise over the water. He knew he had something. He did not fully understand what it was, but he knew it was important. When he brought the work back to Göttingen, Max Born looked at it and recognized the mathematical structure immediately. Heisenberg had reinvented matrix algebra, a branch of mathematics that had existed since the 1850s but that most physicists had never encountered. The tables were matrices, and the fact that their multiplication is non-commutative is a fundamental property of matrix math. Born, together with his student Pascual Jordan, helped Heisenberg formalize the theory into what became known as matrix mechanics, the first complete self-consistent formulation of quantum mechanics. It worked. It predicted spectral lines. It handled atoms more complex than hydrogen. It was rigorous. And almost nobody could use it because it was honestly nearly impenetrable. Pure abstract algebra with no physical picture attached, no visualization, no way to imagine what was happening. Just arrays of numbers and multiplication rules. Most physicists found it baffling. And then a few months later, everything changed because Erwin Schrödinger published a completely different approach, one that looked familiar, that felt intuitive, and that would become the version of quantum mechanics most physicists actually use. Schrödinger was older than the other quantum revolutionaries, in his late 30s, and he was inspired directly by de Broglie's idea from episode 2. If electrons are waves, Schrödinger reasoned, then there should be a wave equation governing them. Just as Maxwell's equations govern light waves, and the classical wave equation governs vibrations on a string, there should be an equation for matter waves. In December 1925, Schrödinger went on a holiday to a villa in Arosa, in the Swiss Alps. He brought along a woman who was not his wife, and history has never established who she was. And during that retreat, over a few intensely productive weeks, he derived the equation that bears his name. The Schrödinger equation describes how a mathematical object called the wave function evolves over time. The wave function, usually written with the Greek letter psi, contains, in principle, everything you can know about a quantum system. It is the master object, the central thing. Every question you ask about a quantum system gets answered by doing some mathematical operation on psi. And physicists loved it because, unlike Heisenberg's matrices, the Schrödinger equation was a differential equation. The kind of math physicists had been using for 2 centuries. You could picture things. You could imagine the wave function as a real wave sloshing around in space, changing shape, evolving. Schrödinger himself believed, at least initially, that the wave function was the electron, that the electron was literally a wave smeared out in space, and psi described its shape, a real physical thing. So now there were 2 theories, matrix mechanics and wave mechanics, different math, different pictures, same predictions. And Schrödinger proved in 1926 that the 2 were mathematically equivalent, the same theory written in different notation, like describing a circle with Cartesian coordinates or polar coordinates, same circle, different language. But the question that mattered, the one that would consume physics for a century, it was not about the math, it was about meaning. What does the wave function actually represent? What is psi telling us about the world? And this is where Max Born dropped the bomb. Born, the same Max Born who had helped Heisenberg formalize matrix mechanics, looked at Schrödinger's wave function and saw a problem. When you solve the Schrödinger equation for an electron in an atom, psi spreads out over a region of space. It does not sit at a single point. It forms shapes, clouds, globes, shells, beautiful, complex 3-dimensional forms. But when you actually measure the electron's position, you find it at one specific location, always, every time. You never detect half an electron here and half there. So the wave function cannot literally be the electron smeared out, the way Schrödinger wanted to believe. In 1926, Born proposed something more subtle and frankly more disturbing. He said, the wave function does not give you the electron's position. It gives you the probability of finding the electron at each position. Specifically, the square of psi at any point tells you the probability of detecting the electron there, big value of psi squared. Likely to find it, small value. Unlikely. 0, never. Let me give you a picture. Imagine you are looking down at a foggy city at night. You cannot see the ground, but you can see a glow through the fog, brighter in some places, dimmer in others. The glow tells you where the streetlights probably are. Not where any one light definitely is, but where you are more or less likely to find one if you drop below the fog and look. The wave function is like that glow. It is a cloud of probability. Dense where the electron is likely to be found. Thin where it is unlikely. And it has real, measurable shape. In 2013, Physicists used a technique called photoionization microscopy to directly image the orbital structure of hydrogen atoms, the nodal patterns, the lobes, the shells, and what they saw matched the probability distributions calculated from Schrödinger's equation with extraordinary precision. The shapes are real. The probability cloud is real. What is not real, apparently, is the electron having a definite position before you look. That word, before you look, is where all the trouble starts. Born's interpretation says before measurement, the electron does not have a definite position. The wave function describes a genuine spread of possibilities, and the act of measurement collapses that spread into a single outcome. Before you look, psi is a cloud. After you look, psi is a spike, a point, a definite answer. But what is a measurement? What counts? Does a photon hitting the electron count? Does a magnetic field count? Does a conscious observer need to be involved? Where exactly does the fuzzy quantum world of superposition end and the sharp classical world of definite outcomes begin? This is called the measurement problem, and it is, I want to be very precise about this, unsolved. It has been unsolved since 1926, and it is unsolved right now. Every interpretation of quantum mechanics is essentially a different answer to this one question, and it has real physical consequences. Here is one that still startles me. In 1990, Wayne Itano and David Wineland at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, in Boulder, Colorado, performed an experiment using trapped beryllium ions. They prepared ions in one quantum state and let them evolve naturally toward a different state. Left alone, the ions would make the transition in a predictable amount of time. But then they started watching. They made rapid, repeated measurements of the ions during the transition, and the more frequently they measured, the slower the transition happened. Measure often enough and the transition essentially freezes. The ion stays in its original state. Watching it prevents it from changing. And this is called the quantum Zeno effect, named after Zeno's paradox about the arrow that cannot move because at every instant it is at rest. And it is experimentally confirmed. The act of measurement, whatever measurement is, does not just passively reveal what a system is doing, it intervenes. It changes the outcome. Observation in quantum mechanics is not a spectator sport. Now, you are thinking something. I know you are. You are thinking. This probability business is just our ignorance. The electron is really somewhere. We just do not know where until we look. It is like a ball under one of three cups. The ball is under a specific cup before I lift it. My ignorance does not change that. And I understand why you think that. It is the most natural thought in the world. It is also wrong. And we know it is wrong, not from philosophy, but from experiment. In 1964, John Bell derived a mathematical inequality that any theory with hidden definite properties must obey. And in the 1980s, Alain Aspect tested it. The inequality was violated. The universe does not have hidden definite values lurking underneath the probabilities. The fuzziness is not in your knowledge. It is in reality. We will go deep into Bell's theorem and what it means in the next episode. But for now, I want you to sit with this. Born's probability interpretation is not a statement about what you know. It is a statement about what exists. Born won the Nobel Prize for this in 1954, 28 years after his proposal. That delay tells you something about how uncomfortable the physics community was with what he was saying. They used his interpretation every day. They calculated with it, built technology with it, confirmed it in every experiment they ran. But giving him the prize meant acknowledging officially that the heart of the most successful theory in physics is a probability, not a mechanism, not a trajectory, a cloud of maybe. I need to tell you about Schrödinger's cat, not because it is the cliche you think it is, but because almost everyone gets the point of it wrong. In 1935, 9 years after publishing his equation, Schrödinger wrote a paper in which he described a thought experiment. You know the setup. A cat in a sealed box, a vial of poison connected to a radioactive atom. If the atom decays, the vial breaks, the cat dies. If the atom does not decay, the cat lives. Quantum mechanics says the atom, until measured, is in a superposition of decayed and not decayed, and since the cat's fate is tied to the atom, the cat should be in a superposition of alive and dead. Both. Neither. A blur. Here is what almost everyone misses. Schrödinger was not celebrating this, and he was not saying, look how wonderfully strange quantum mechanics is. He was mocking the Copenhagen interpretation. He was saying, if you take this probability collapse business seriously, If you really believe that superposition is real until measurement, then you're committed to the absurdity of a cat that is simultaneously alive and dead. And since that is obviously ridiculous, something must be wrong with the interpretation. It was a reductio ad absurdum, an argument against the standard view, not for it. And the uncomfortable truth is that nearly a century later, we still do not have a universally accepted resolution. Copenhagen says the superposition collapses when a measurement happens, but refuses to define precisely what that means. The many worlds interpretation says the cat is both alive and dead, and the universe splits into two branches. The pilot wave interpretation says there was never a real superposition. The cat was always one or the other, guided by a hidden wave. Objective collapse theories say superposition spontaneously breaks down for large objects due to some unknown mechanism. Smart people disagree passionately. And the math gives the same predictions regardless of which interpretation you choose. The universe gives us the answers and hides the explanation. So here is where we stand. By 1926, quantum mechanics is complete, or at least its mathematical machinery is complete. Heisenberg built it from observables and matrices. Schrödinger built it from waves and differential equations, and they are the same theory. Born told us the wave function gives probabilities, and the theory works. It predicts the behavior of atoms, molecules, solids, radiation with a precision that no other theory in the history of science has matched. But what it means, what the wave function is, whether it describes reality or just our knowledge of reality, what happens during a measurement, why the quantum world of superposition gives way to the classical world of definite outcomes, all of that remains to this day an open question. I do not find that embarrassing. I find it honest. The universe is not obligated to be comprehensible at every level. It is not required to provide a picture that maps onto your everyday experience. What it is required to do, what it does spectacularly, is be consistent. And quantum mechanics is consistent, wildly, precisely, maddeningly consistent. It just will not tell you what it is consistent about. And that is not the end of the trouble, because in the next part of this story, the greatest physicist of the 20th century, the man who started the quantum revolution with his paper on photons and turned against it. Einstein looked at Born's probabilities, at Bohr's Copenhagen interpretation, at the measurement problem, and he said, no, this cannot be the whole story. There must be something deeper, something definite, something real. And he spent the next 30 years of his life trying to prove it. He failed, but the way he failed, the specific argument he constructed, the thought experiment he designed, and the theorem that another man would derive from it 3 decades later would reveal something about the universe so strange that it makes everything we have talked about so far look almost tame. That is where we go next. Here is the question that I keep turning over, and I genuinely want to know where you land on it. Is the wave function real? A thing out there in the world, like an electric field or a gravitational wave? Something that exists whether or not you're looking? Or is it just a tool, a bookkeeping device, a way of organizing your information about a system with no more physical reality than a batting average or a credit score? Because if it is real, then reality itself is made of probability. And if it is just a tool, then there is a deeper reality underneath that we have not found. Either answer is disturbing. Pick the one that disturbs you less and tell me why. The wave function does not describe the world you see. It describes the world that decides what you see, and then it vanishes, leaving behind only the result, like a dream that writes a sentence and erases itself.